exercise and depression. So the first one, aerobic exercise can produce substantial improvements in mood in patients with major depressive disorders in a short time. And the second one, exercise has a large and significant antidepressant effect. What they found in this meta study is 30 minutes of aerobic activity 3 times a week. Your heartbeat has to be elevated for 30 minutes. 3 times a week is just as effective as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, are considered to be the most modern and effective antidepressants. Well, if you had a choice, if you didn't know about NLP and didn't have any training in NLP, didn't know you could work with anxiety with NLP and depression with NLP, what would you rather have? I mean, I would take the 30 minutes of aerobic activity 3 times a week rather than taking a drug, frankly.
Hi there, welcome to the replay of our after hours discussions with professional coaches. Your exclusive complimentary Sunday session for all of our community around the world, where coaching minds unite with our people to create real world results. I am Adrian Cahill, your host and founder of the Motivate community, and more recently, Monday Morning Motivation. As a global trainer in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, coaching, and hypnosis, this weekly gathering brings some of my colleagues from trainings, my fellow students and coaches all together in one place where we can discuss, share, help change the world by delivering free, quality information that's here to help you transform.
We'll go through some general frames about anxiety, what it is, the physiology of it, the structure of it, and how our thinking processes, our cognitive processes can be used to generate a state. But I thought we'd just quickly start with a definition. So the formal definition is a feeling of apprehension about a potential or an unknown future. Now, what's significant about that is the word future. And when you look into how a person generates an anxious state, they typically have representations they're making of the future. And that's a real clue to how to work with it. Now, I've got a question here. Is anxiety a mental disorder? Well, it all depends on your model of the world. Formally, within medicine and specifically psychiatry, yes, it's considered to be a mental disorder. I have the way I think about it, anxiety is a state. It's a state of mind. It's an emotion. And the fact that we as human beings experience a variety of different states and states of structure, and if you understand how a state is organized, you can change your state. And by the way, you change your state every day. You do this on a regular basis throughout the day. You will go for a variety of different states. Now, whether you're changing those states deliberately or it's just an unconscious automated function, well, that depends on the individual. And sometimes people will change a state deliberately, but a lot of people just go through state changes and find themselves in various states during the day without any conscious agency over the states that they experience. Now, I've got a statistic here from Australia. I know we've got a lot of you from other countries. The fact is you're probably going to have a similar percentage in the countries that you're from. All I can say is certainly in Australia, they say 1 in 7 people has an anxiety disorder. There we are, got that from the Australian Department of Health. That's pretty high. 1 in 7 people experience anxiety, and it's it's bad enough for them to recognize it as a problem and to have had some diagnosis, from a medical professional that they have an anxiety disorder. Um, that's shocking to me. It's a very, very high percentage. 2019 statistic, the number one mental health problem that a person saw a medical general practitioner, ordinary doctor, was um, anxiety, problems with anxiety. That's the number one uh, psychological problem that the person saw a GP about. The second one was depression. They tend to be the two big ones in Australia, and I think in many, many countries. Um, Now we need to, they make some differentiations in psychiatry of different types of anxiety disorders. Um, I've got generalized anxiety disorder, um, and that's really well, really, there's another one that is not there, but really should be. Um, a lot of people will have anxiety about a very specific event, one specific future event. So I have to make a presentation at work to my boss next week, and I'm anxious about it. So that's an event-specific anxiety. Generalized anxiety disorder is where a person is having anxiety multiple times about the future in general. It's not for just one event. Now that's quite different to panic disorders. So I've just been referred to somebody who's got a panic disorder, which I'll probably see hopefully next week. Um, Example, worked with a woman who was walking through the mall one day. She had never had a panic attack in her life before, and she had a panic attack. It seemed to be out of the blue, and a complete panic. She thought she was dying. Okay, a really bad panic. That's a panic disorder. Um, um, and we used a different approach to the general approach to anxiety with her because it's a very specific type of problem. Um, I had a client who had a panic on a plane flying to her home country. So she had immigrated to Australia. She's flying to her home country to attend her father's funeral. She came to see me because she thought she had a phobia of flying, but it was actually a panic. In fact, in her case, it was a signal from her unconscious that had been trying to communicate something important to her, and and then it finally became very intense in the form of a panic while flying. So that's a type of anxiety problem. Simple phobias are considered an anxiety disorder. Does everybody know what simple phobia is? Okay, just very quickly, it's a common garden variety type of phobias where now I'm going to talk from an Australian perspective. It might be a fear of snakes or spiders or sharks. Um, um, those are common ones in Australia. But it could be heights. It could be a fear of flights. It could be a fear of cockroaches. I've worked with quite a few people with phobias of pigeons. I worked with a young woman a couple of years back who had a phobia of chickens. Now, it wasn't just live chickens. The phobia had generalized to the extent that even seeing cooked chicken, the sight of cooked chicken, um, was enough to generate a phobic response. Um, that's a straightforward way. We've got straightforward ways of working with simple phobias with a couple of different ways. And we saw that in one session. Whereas a complex phobia it's typically a phobia that has secondary benefits. And you might wonder, how could a phobia have a secondary benefit? Well, um, um, I worked with a client who had agoraphobia. That's a complex phobia, a fear of going out of the house, a fear of leaving the house. Um, well, um, as a result of having agoraphobia, he had other people doing his shopping. So the things that needed to take place in the external world, he had other people doing that because he couldn't leave the house. So those were the secondary benefits, and those secondary benefits need to be dealt with first before reducing and clearing up the phobia. So those are the different types of anxiety disorders. We're going to talk about the general one, the usual one where a person just has a feeling of apprehension about potential or unknown future. So that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Um, and you know what? We don't need to go through the slides. I think we're rather we can all see each other face to face. So um, I think I like to look at this in two ways, in two sections. One is how do we manage it, and um, well, before we do that, any questions or clarifications would people like about what we've covered so far?
Yeah, Chris, I just looking back to my own circumstance, just something to clarify that with those numbers from the government, it was about that time where I visited a doctor and had what I would call intense frustration with circumstances of things happening. And I found I was getting angry. So I that, and of course, my current partner, the wife at the time, was suffering from that for me being in that state.
Mm.
But then she was actually the trigger for the state. So it was but the first thing he did was put me on medication, which actually was mind altering and made me calm. I can't even remember what it was.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then, because I was too low and calm, then put me on antidepressants. So, I mean, this situation in Australia with medication and doctors, it's a really, I think, generated one.
Sure. Sure, Jay. So the thing is this. Often for a lot of people, their first port of call is going to be their medical doctor, their general practitioner. And basically, if the people think about a lot of state problems with people's states and emotions as a mental health problem, and so because it's framed as a mental health problem, a part of health, then the typical approach will be to put a person on some sort of medication. Um, and you've got to keep in mind, general practitioners only have, um, I don't know, I think it's 20 or 30 hours of training in psychiatry. They don't do a lot of training in psychiatry. Now in Australia, doctors can refer a person to a clinical psychologist for 10 sessions that's paid by the state. So they can organise what's known as a mental health plan, and then a person can go see a psychologist for 10 sessions. So things have changed in the last few years. However, I must say, before that was made available to people, psychological services on a mental health plan prescribed by a general practitioner. One of my mates who trained with me years ago, a good friend of mine who's a clinical psychologist, he told me he only knew of 3 psychologists who were able to make a living doing clinical work in Sydney. But now with these mental health plans, they're overwhelmed with work. Um, um, so a lot of doctors now will want to try and get a person on a mental health plan and seeing a psychologist rather than taking drugs. If that doesn't work, then they give them drugs. I don't know how many years ago that was, Jay, but um, there's a move towards psychological treatment. Now, of course, we have some very powerful patterns developed in NLP for helping people to change their state, to interrupt a state, to be able to design a state, to be able to even activate flow states and high performance states. We've got a whole stack of models and patterns for working with state manipulation in NLP, including managing and transforming anxiety, managing and transforming depression, dealing with simple phobias, um, complex phobias, panic disorders, other states, helping people with their, I've done a lot of work with over the years. So I've had a private practice for since 19 November, I think it's early November 1982. So I started my private practice. So I've seen a lot of people doing one-on-one work for various psychological issues. And I've worked with a lot of people with who are just racked with guilt, for example. Guilt, well, that's just a state. Anxiety is just a state. Depression is just a state. Um, Quickly share something, a nice um, piece of research, actually. Um, where is that? Where did it go? Um, I I can't see the. Hold on, I've lost the screen. Hold on, maybe get the screen. What have I done with that screen? That's bizarre. Um, I lost my slideshow. So, so here's a couple of studies on exercise and depression. So the first one, aerobic exercise can produce substantial improvements in mood in patients with major depressive disorders in a short time. How's that? And the second one, exercise has a large and significant antidepressant effect. Now, the second one here is a meta-analysis. So it's a meta-study. They looked at something like 35 different studies done by different researchers on the effects of aerobic activity and depression. And what they found in this meta-study is 30 minutes of aerobic activity 3 times a week. That is, for that 30 minutes, your heartbeat has to be elevated for 30 minutes during the aerobic activity, whatever it might be, whether it's walking, jogging, swimming, running, or some sport or whatever. 30 minutes of aerobic activity 3 times a week is just as effective as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants. And the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, are considered to be the most modern and effective antidepressants. So doing that 3 times a week for 30 minutes of aerobic activity, well, if you had a choice, now we've got better choices than what I'm about to say. If you didn't know about NLP and didn't have any training in NLP, didn't know you could work with anxiety with NLP and depression with NLP, um, what would you rather have? I mean, I would take the 30 minutes of aerobic activity 3 times a week rather than taking a drug, frankly. And that's incredibly important piece of research. It shows that people don't need to go on antidepressants long term for depression. And by the way, it's not just depression. The study was on depression, but you change the way you use your physiology, that is, your posture, your movement, the way you move yourself, the way you breathe. Um, um, that type of activity will change your state. No, you know, no problem at all. And um, however, we've got some more. So let's talk about managing it now. Well, I mentioned three things.
Mm. Just before
Um,
moving, sorry to interrupt you.
you start.
Gregory has a questions. Gregory Nicola, can anxiety be manifest physical and or emotional as a defense mechanism? It is in the
Okay.
chat.
Well, defense mechanism, that's a psychiatric term. And I'm familiar with the term, but it's not part of the model that I work with. So I can't really comment on defense mechanisms because that's just not part of my model of the world. So um, now the interesting can it be manifest physically? Sure. Um, so um, have you have you seen somebody who's anxious, who's in an anxious state? Maybe just get a show of hands. Can I get some indication if you've ever seen somebody in an anxious state? Yeah,
I've seen a
somebody.
lot of bouncing legs in my life.
Okay, but you've seen that, and
Yeah.
you know it was an anxious state because they may have given you evidence. They may have said, "I feel anxious."
Mm.
So they subjectively they believe they're anxious, and you've seen what they look like. Okay. Um, now, um, when a person's in an anxious state, they're using their physiology in a particular way. You can see it in their posture. Now, if you were to examine their breathing pattern, okay, now you don't need to answer this, okay, because this is a public space. You don't need to answer this. I want you just to note for yourself, have you ever been anxious? Just think about that. If you have, um, how was your breathing? Was it slow, medium, or fast in terms of the tempo? Okay, and if you don't have to admit that you've had it, but if you, what do you think it would be, if the actual breathing tempo, slow, medium, or fast? What's your guess?
Chris, I would add, I think it's shallow. I'm not
Well,
sure
well,
about
yeah,
the
well, that's
tempo.
not the distinction we're going for, but we can talk about that too. But no, first of
Yeah.
all, tempo. Typically, it's fast.
Well,
Now,
I'm assuming it would, but I can't remember seeing that. I
okay,
remember
well,
shallow.
for anybody who's experienced it, I want you to reflect on that and note: was it
Mm,
slow, medium, or fast? Now it's going to be but it could be medium, but medium to fast. It's fairly fast. And now, even or uneven. Do you think the breathing is going to be even or uneven if a person's really anxious? By the way, intensely
mm,
anxious.
yeah.
Any guesses?
Uneven, definitely.
Uneven. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this type of stuff, right? It's uneven
Yeah.
and it's fast. Okay. So you will see, so it's in the physiology, it's in the breathing pattern for starters. Now, um, um, I imagine everybody here has had experience being really excited about something. Have you all, I hope you've, I hope you've all experienced excitement. All right. So when you're excited, what's your breathing pattern like? Is it slow, medium, or fast? Like really excited. Let's go for intensely excited. Typically fast, okay? Or medium to fast. And is the breathing even or uneven? Well, in really excited states, often the breathing's uneven. There's quite a similar physiology in terms of how people are using the physiology if you compare a person in a state where they're highly excited and they're anxious. I just thought I'd mention that. Isn't that fascinating? Um, now, so one approach is um, um, is make a shift in the person's breathing. So, um, anybody come across block breathing? Yeah.
Heaps.
Uh, so here's a breathing pattern that you can use. In fact, I showed two methods just as a exercise for one of my clients to do before seeing me. One was this breathing pattern we're about to do, and the other was called a sway process to break up the state. And he found the breathing pattern worked incredibly well to manage an anxious state when he was anxious. And then we got together a couple of weeks later and actually worked with the state and cleaned that up. So the pattern is this: you breathe in through your nose to a count of a comfortable count is going to be over 4 or 5 depending on the individual. So you in through your mouth to a count of 4 or 5. You're going to hold your breath for 4 or 5. Sorry, in through your nose to a count of 4 or 5, hold for 4 or 5, out through your mouth for a count of 4 or 5, hold for 4 or 5, and repeat. And you do that for 3, 4 minutes. That will change your state. It will calm you all the way down. So it's this, and just repeat for 2, 3, 4 minutes, and that will change a person's state. So that's known as block breathing, but we also use it. It's very good for changing a state. If you're a bit anxious, or any other state where you might be a little hyped up. If you're angry, you could do that. That will change the state. That will calm you down. So that's one. Another approach is is to sway, and so if I now I'm not in an anxious state, but if I was, if I was in an anxious state, I would just sway from side to side slowly, and I usually go slightly backwards and forwards as well. Just a slow sway, nice even rhythm. Do that for 3 or 4 minutes, and that will often break the state as well. Those are just simple little management processes, and it's going to change your physiology and therefore change your state. So that's just management. That's all it is. It's not dealing with the problem. But I've had people do exercises where we have them reactivate an anxious state and then do the sway. Sometimes I'll even move them and sway them myself. Always ask permission to touch a person before you touch a person, by the way. But anyway, and then I'll make that movement with them, and I will challenge them to try and maintain the anxious state. And you keep it moving, and typically they can't keep the anxious state. So both those methods work quite well. Now, if I'm working with somebody with anxiety, the first thing I do with them, I use something called perceptual positions. Now, very briefly, if you were for a moment to imagine yourself on a stage, I'm talking about a playhouse, the theatre. I don't know if everybody's had the pleasure of going to see a play, but if you just imagine a stage and you imagine yourself on that stage, and you could pretend, if you want to, you could act as if you are the director of the theatre and you're going to be directing the actors on the stage. So, Jasmine, if you were doing this, you would be looking at a woman on stage who, interestingly and remarkably, looks and sounds just like you. Okay, and by the way, you're the director. So, Madam Director, you're looking at this woman who looks and sounds just like Jasmine. Okay. So taking that position as if you were an observer or a director, observing yourself, we call that third position. It's a perceptual position. It's called the third position. It's the position as if you were observing yourself from the outside. Whereas if you now, Jasmine, you step onto the stage and you become that woman on stage, so you're looking out of your eyes, you're listening out of your ears, and you're feeling whatever you feel on the stage, we call that first position. Now, there's three perceptual positions. You've got first, that's the position of the self. Third, the position of the observer. And there's also the position of another person. So if you were walking in the shoes of another actor, a different character on the stage, different person, we call that second position. And originally, John Grinder developed perceptual positions as a model for working with relationships and developing more choice in terms of how we relate to other people. So this is very good if a person has a problem with a relationship with some other person. Perceptual positions was designed to help a person develop more choice for that. It just happens the ability to take a third position, what we call clean third, that is where you are an observer observing yourself in whatever the situation is a foundational skill that for self-management, for managing our own states. And it's very, very effective. So I had a client come to see me, brought him by his wife. He was seeing a psychiatrist, he'd been depressed for a couple of years, was on antidepressants. She had had enough of him moping around in this depressed state at home. It had all become too much for her, and she found out about me, so she brought him in. So, and because he had already formed some very limiting beliefs about depression. Depression is difficult to deal with. Depression is hard to change. That people, once you're depressed, you can be depressed for years. He had developed that particular model of the world. Rather than challenging that directly, I taught him how to shift from first position out to third, and so he could observe himself. And I had him rehearse it multiple times in my office. And then his task for the week was to spend 15 minutes a day going out, observing himself when he's depressed, stepping back into the depressed state, going back out, observing himself, stepping back into the depressed state, and going back out and observing himself. And he had to do that 15 minutes a day for a week. And he came in for his next session. And so that was a task he was given in preparation for doing some therapy. And his feedback was, it's been a really weird week. It's been a very, very weird, strange week. He's hardly been depressed. He had hardly been depressed all week. So because basically, if you are in an observer position on any state that you might be in, well, when you're in third position, you're not in that state. And especially if you have what's known as a clean third position, and there's a whole approach to how do you build a clean third so that the person is observing and listening to themselves out there in whatever state they're in. It's something we learn to do, and it's a very useful foundational skill. By the way, the basis of this, according to the child psychologist who long passed away, but one of the great figures in the field of child psychology, Piaget, who did a lot of his work in the 50s and 60s, he published research that showed that children at a certain age learn to be able to take an observer position. So we all learn to do this at some point, whether we use it very often or not. Whether we're skilled at it or not is a different story, but it's something that's part of our human cognitive, uh, you know, uh, architecture. Something that we can do as human beings is act as if and take a position as if we're observing ourselves. Very powerful skill because that is a good way to interrupt a state. So one, to manage it, you might use a breathing pattern to manage it. You might use a sway, physical movement. Go for a run, go for a brisk walk. Do something physical and aerobic is even better. And that will help you change and manage the state, be able to go to a clean third and building that skill in and so that you can move to an observer position at will help you. One of the foundational skills I want people to have and to do before we then work with changing the state, teaching them how to change the state. In fact, how to deal with it so they don't have it as a recurring problem. Darko, you had a question, and I think Gregory still has some questions I haven't answered, so I'm going to get there.
I was willing to point your attention a little bit to the chat to there is a few questions.
Okay. Okay, with councils are kind of doing something like this, that's fantastic. I'm really impressed. That well done. Um, yeah, and the fight flight response is normal, absolutely. We're hardwired for that. I mean, you know, um, we as a species, I mean, we got to take into evolutionary psychology as well. As a species, we're a hunter-gatherer species. I think the general consensus is that we evolved on the savannah in Africa, and we're out there, and then we pick up for our peripheral vision movement, okay, and then we turn focus in, you know, as a predatory cat. Well, it's a good idea to have a fight flight response, okay?
Mm.
Fight, flight, or freeze, but but that's hardwired in, and now, yes, I think sometimes when a person gets really anxious, then you get you get the adrenaline pumping through, absolutely. Um, but we're living in an industrial or fast becoming post-industrial society where we're not dealing with um, you know coming across unexpected predators out there in the streets. Oh, well, I hope not. Maybe that might still be true in some parts of the world. Um, um, so part of I think good state management is being able to put yourself into a clean third position. Um, any other questions? Anything about what we covered so far? Because I'd love to get into talking about how you can start transforming.
So I
I
will
want
start
to ask
from. Uh,
I wanted to ask a question. Can you
Yes.
touch a little bit on the social anxiety? Because you define it in terms of like feature.
Yeah. Well, I I just haven't worked with people with social anxiety. I would love to do a piece of work with somebody with that and find out how it works for them. And really, the very next topic I want to touch on is the cognitive processes, the mental processes that are involved with generating a state. So typically, when people are anxious, and I would think this would be social anxiety too, but I would like to work with somebody and find out. Um, uh, if a person, it's the person will have representations of the future. So now I can't talk about it because I don't have social anxiety, but I'm going to pretend I did for a moment. Um, um, but take it with a grain of salt because I haven't actually worked with somebody with that. But if I imagined really bad things happening in social situations, I could certainly generate anxious feelings about possible social situations, and I suspect that's what social anxiety is. Do you know something about social anxiety? Could you? I'd love to hear more.
I have experience. I have friends with experience as well. Sometimes it's about what other people are gonna think of me
Yeah,
that they get in the head in a social environment. Could be a party, could be classroom or stuff.
yeah. Okay, so hear what you just said in your language. Something very interesting. Thinking about what somebody is going to think about me. So I'm thinking about something that somebody is going to think about. So going to indicates there's a future component, that there's some representation of the future.
I mean, it does have a future component
Yeah,
because, like, I haven't said that yet, and like, what are they gonna think about me if I say it?
yeah.
But it's not that future, it's happening in the present.
Yes, but that's right. You're in the present, but you do have a representation of what? Now, the representation can be in more than one form. It'd be representations of the future. So, would you be willing? Would you like to explore this a little bit? Would you be okay doing it on a? Okay, I always want to ask because we're in a public setting and I always want to respect people's privacy and so on. So, can I ask you your first name because I've just got you down there as you, and I don't know your first name.
I either go by you or L, if that's okay for you.
What do you prefer?
So my original name is like hard to pronounce. It's not like an American or Australian name, so you works well.
Okay, you. Thank you very much. Okay, so the first thing that is I like you to do is we're going to have you take an inventory of your state right now. And all that means, very simple actually. All I like you to do is be aware of your posture and the fact that you're moving. So there's a sway there, there's a bit of a movement in your body. So be aware of the movement in your body, your posture, and your breathing. And then note what you're doing with your senses. Now, I know that you can hear me. So auditorily, your attention auditory is external because you can hear my voice. Okay. Be aware whether you're aware of your surroundings in terms of what you can see, and now the next thing is, are you running in a dialogue right now or not?
No.
No. Okay.
Even like tiny bit or no?
No, no, it's fine. So your attention is more external at the moment. Are you aware of
Correct.
more of internal sensations, or contrast, are you more aware of physical, like the posture, your musculature?
More physical, yeah.
Good. Okay, so your attention is primarily external. You're aware of what you can see around you. Um,
Correct.
now, so that's going to be your baseline. Okay, that's the state you're in right now. Now, whether it has a name as an emotion or not doesn't matter, but that's your baseline. Okay. Now, if now is can you find an example where you're anxious about some social situation, what somebody might think about you, um, that's mild enough that you're comfortable to go back into it?
All right, let me find and
So,
I'll step in it.
yeah, we want a mild one. Okay.
Got it.
Good. Now, staying in that memory for a moment. So, we call this first position. It's as you if you're there, looking out of your eyes, listening out of your ears. You're in your body in that situation, so you're living it and feeling it. Great. Well done. And be aware of your posture and whether you're moving or not, or and note where your attention is. Is it on the external world in that situation? Uh, um, or are you making pictures in your head? Are you aware of what you can hear around you in that situation? Or are you talking to yourself or hearing something inside? Are you aware of your physicality, your posture, your musculature, your breathing? Or are you more aware of internal sensations?
Yeah, less external awareness,
And more
high
internal.
internal voice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I would expect that, by the way. But I'd rather you discover that, okay? Because it's your discovery. Well done. So typically, if a person's anxious, their attention is going to be more internal and less external, okay? Now, can you shake all that off? Well done. Okay. Now, um, I'd like you to find any example from your life where you were just doing your thing, performing, doing whatever you do that, and doing well. Um, it could be an area that you have expertise in, something you're good at, and you just happen to be in a social situation. There are other people around, and you are just you being you, doing your thing, and frankly having a damn good time. Can you find an example like that? Good. And once again, take an inventory. So be aware of your posture and your breathing. So you're remembering from the point of view as if you're reliving it, looking out of your eyes, listening out of your ears. You're back there in the experience. And you're going to note where your attention is in terms of external, internal. So where's your attention in terms of what you see, hear, feel?
So in that context, I was communicating a lot.
Yep.
So I kind of had to be external all the time, a little bit.
Yeah. Isn't that great? So, I'm just going to summarize what we've been doing. Well, I'm going to explain what the hell we've been doing, just so for everybody and for you, of course. Um, by contrasting, you know this the baseline state you started off with, and then we find an anxious state of some sort. Let's say it's social anxiety, fine, and then we find a state where the person's performing and they don't have social anxiety, okay, in that context. And you compare and you start to find out what's different in terms of how's my attention and my state organized when I'm anxious compared with when I'm not. And I thought rather than just the baseline to compare it with, why don't we go for something which is quite different is when you're performing, you're doing something and you're speaking out loud. And your attention has to be external based on what you're
Yeah.
doing in that context. So while you're in that context performing, you're not going to have social anxiety. So that tells us something about how the state's organized, a little to begin with, by doing a contrast. So one of the basic ways we learn is contrasting. We can contrast between the undesired state and some other more useful state, do a comparison, find out how's our attention, our posture, breathing, and attention different. That's a really useful thing. And I like people to do these things themselves. I just guide them through, but they make the discovery. They is their so you it's your discovery. You're aware of these differences. And by the way, unconscious minds are really smart, by the way. A lot smarter. I think now, personal opinion, this might not be correct. My personal opinion is unconscious minds are smarter than conscious minds. Um, Now, I do have a bias towards the unconscious. And because of that, what happens is um, the unconscious mind goes, oh, yeah, we've got this contrast. We know the differences. So the unconscious can choose to put you into a state which is more desirable. So you have a choice between feeling socially anxious or being in the other state. Your unconscious can choose to do that if he wants to. and just put you into the state. I think this is a useful thing. Now, we're not saying we're solving the problem. We haven't really unpacked and learned a little more about how the other state, the social anxiety state, works. So I'd love to, sorry, any comments for you before I ask you to do something else?
Yeah, I mean, if I run like a little process like that before that situation, I can change my state better. But sometimes the situation just like comes up, I might get caught like off guard or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like I have less state management.
Okay. Do you work out at all? Do you do physical exercise, weight
Yeah,
training?
occasionally.
Yeah, okay. So when you think about the weight training you've done, and you occasionally do, and could continue to do, well, we do it because we do get some short-term immediate benefit doing it. Let's take weight training as an example, but the real benefit is in the long run. So we do it even because of the cumulative effect, which is later on we're going to have a bit more muscle mass, and we're going to have better muscle definition, and we're going to actually be physically healthier because we've been doing it on a regular basis. So the idea is yes, as human beings, sometimes we're caught out. Something happens, trigger, bang, oh my God, and then we find ourselves in a state that we may not want. Okay. By doing these sorts of exercises, we're training ourselves, we're training our unconscious so that we can shift our state fairly quickly. We learn to shift our state. And it's unfortunate. I don't know what's like in the culture that you grow up in. I can only comment about the culture I grew up in. I suspect it might be similar. I've got a suspicion it's probably a similar thing. So in the culture I grew up in, we were not formally trained as children in terms of how to manage our states. There was some stuff in the culture. There was a little in the culture, but it was not formal. It was not systematic. Um, um, we kind of had exposure, so some of it was implicit. So certainly when I was at primary school, um, we did sporting activities, and the same as high school as well. Well, yes, and people and children are doing that. They're changing their physiology and they're changing their state. But we're not formally taught. If you find yourself in a particular state, this is how to change a state, how to interrupt it, and how to reorganize a state, how to put yourself into some desired state. Um, we're just not taught that stuff. It'd be damn useful if we were as children. So, I mean, if I was running a school for children, one of the first things I'd teach them would be how to activate a useful state for learning just before they begin learning. So let's say before beginning of a subject, you want to make sure that they're able to activate a suitable state that's going to support their learning. But we weren't taught anything like that, and some people picked up some useful skills, and a lot of people weren't exposed to skills in terms of state management. Um, um, so what we do is we can do these this is just an example of a drill. We can do these little drills on a regular basis and start. It's like building up that muscle memory. In this case, I suppose you could call it you're building up the you're strengthening the neural pathways in your brain for shifting your state, for changing your state, for becoming familiar in terms of how you organize when you are in a particular state that supports the outcome and that you have for whatever the context is that you're going into. And that's damn useful. And now it's still, this type of thing does take a little bit of discipline practice, like anything else in life. You put the work in, you put some exercises in, you do it on a regular basis to build up that skill. You're building up that pattern in your neurology, and then at some point, even if you're caught out, something triggers, bang, and then reorganize yourself, bang, I'm okay again. A friend of mine told me he went up to my wife one time and he said to her, I've got it's one of my mates. Mates is Australian colloquialism for friend. It's like buddy in the US. So just in case, or better make that clear because I don't want to be misunderstood. One of my mates, one of my buddies, he was telling me he went up to my wife Jules one day and said to her, "How the hell do you do it? You always seem to be so composed emotionally, right?" And he said, "How do you do it?" And she said, "I'm like anybody else." She says, "I get thrown off my center from time to time, by events in the world, triggers, whatever they might be." And she says, "It's just I get back onto an even keel quickly." I thought, gee, that's a nice description of how my wife operates. And um, she manages the state really, really well. So if something triggers, interrupt, bang, takes her by surprise, seconds, she's back into a resourceful, centered state. Now, how the hell did she get there? Practice. So this is just one exercise, okay? But this is a foundational sort of thing. I think it's good for anybody to do, um, because it's the basis of having real choice about our states. So do you mind if I ask you, would you like to do a little more on this?
I would love to.
Okay, good. Okay. Um, so can you put yourself back into that state again, the undesired one, so you're thinking about what people might think about you. If you don't mind me asking, what on earth are you doing that for?
How long?
No, what are you doing it for? What on earth are you doing that
Oh,
for? Thinking about what other people might think about you.
yeah, it's not really logical.
Yeah, okay, so just note that. Now I'm going to respond with a metaphor. You okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So when I went to school, when I was at primary school, so I'm going to give away my age. When I was at primary school, it was normal for children to be hit by teachers. Seriously, that actually went on when I was at primary school. So it was in the day, so that's how far back it was in time. It was the 60s when I was at primary school. And so you have to, if you did something wrong, you get the strap. So this is for young children, you get the strap. So you have to put your hand out, and the teacher had a leather strap and would whack you on the hand. And by the way, it did hurt. I can tell you that it actually hurts, just in case you haven't had that experience. You really don't want it. But anyway, it does hurt. And when I was in high school, now they strap boys, they didn't strap the girls. And when I was at high school, because I was a boy, we had the cane. Do people know what canes are? Anyway, it was originally it was made of cane. And what they would do is you had to bend over and they would whack you on the ass with this thing. Seriously. And and I think some of the male teachers actually enjoyed caning boys. I think there was something not quite right there. But anyway, that's when I was at school. Now, if I got the strap or the cane, I wouldn't go home and tell my parents that I had some corporal punishment at school. Because if I did, the attitude would be, what did you do wrong? What have you done to deserve that? And then I would have been punished a second time. So that's the culture. It's not a very nice culture. That's the culture I grew up in. when I was a child. And nowadays, I grew up in New Zealand. Now, it's the same in Australia. In Australia and New Zealand, it is illegal. It is a crime for a teacher to hit a child, as it should be. And parents would be horrified if anything like that happened to their child. So the culture has changed. But at the time, that was just accepted. It was part of the culture. So there were ideas carried in the culture, implicit, it's not talked about, that people just accept. But the culture changed in those 50 years or so. It's changed. Now, what happens is we can pick up a pattern of behavior or a pattern of thinking that may be perfectly explainable and may even be useful in the time, place, and situation where we learn to do that pattern. And it turns out that pattern is no longer useful because we're operating in different contexts as adults. So sometimes we pick up patterns that may even be useful in the time and place where we learned those patterns. They're just no longer useful. And often I think about when people think about what other people think about them or have concerns about what other people might think about them, that type of pattern. Sure, sometimes in an earlier part of their life, often childhood, that was meaningful under those conditions at that time and at that place. It just hasn't been updated. It's an old pattern that no longer serves and just hasn't been updated. So I think that's a useful way of thinking about this type of thing. That's my personal opinion. I don't know if it resonates with you or not. Um, um, uh, yeah, my wife, I'm going to talk about my wife again. She says something which is quite trite, but you know what? It's useful. She says, people will do what people would do. You know, you can be out in the world and people are going to behave in all sorts of interesting and different and diverse ways, and they're going to do whatever they do, whether it's useful or not useful. That's people. And people are going to think whatever they think, whether it's useful or not, but people are going to think whatever they think. People are going to do whatever they do. And um, but the nice thing is we can become familiar with how we're organized when we're in states that support us and serve us, and to the point where we just don't give a damn what anybody thinks. Who cares? A friend of mine is an outrageous entrepreneur. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. He dresses quite flamboyantly, and he will say outrageous things as well. Now, he is very extroverted. He loves to be the center of attention. And he doesn't care because people are going to do what they do. They're going to react however they react. He doesn't know and he doesn't care. And that is that's just a way of operating. I'm not saying that's the correct way of operating. There's no correct way. There's all different ways people can operate. That's the way he likes to operate in the world. You know? Um, um, yeah, I've got another friend who's more introverted. And that's the way they like to operate in the world. Well, that's a choice too. And one can play anywhere if you choose to between the two extremes. It's a choice. So if you could kind of go back into that state, would you kind of do that for a moment?
Uh,
The anxious one.
okay.
So you be aware of your posture, breathing. Now it's more internal, and you're thinking about how somebody else might think about you. And I'm going to ask a very weird question, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
the question is, how are you thinking about how they might think about you? Are you making pictures? Are you talking to yourself? Are you running a combination of pictures and self-talk? How do you do it? If I had to fill in for you, how would I do this?
Yeah, no pictures, just conversation.
So it's dialogue
Yeah,
in a dialogue. Isn't that
yeah,
interesting?
yeah,
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So could you just stand back and shake all that off for a moment? Because this is for want to say a couple of things for everybody. So when you look at different ways people do anxiety, here's some ways to do it. Now, if you know how to do it, then you go, oh, the hell with that! I'm not going to do that. So if you know how to do it, and you find yourself doing it, you go, well, that doesn't work for me. You just stop it, right? So here's a couple of different ways people do it. One way is I run a movie. It could be stills or movies. If you really want to make it bad, run a movie. Run a movie of a future event and the future event working out in a way that you don't want. So you think about what you don't want and you run a movie, okay? And then from that movie, generate anxious feelings about how this might happen. So in other words, I'm going to make a presentation to my boss next week, and my boss might hate my presentation and tell me that my God, you've really screwed up. Okay, it's whatever the content might be. So I run a movie of an undesired result, and then feel anxious about it. That's one way to do it. Another way, I run a movie and I talk to myself about what's going to go wrong in the movie and then feel bad about it. So pictures in a dialogue and then unpleasant feelings. Here's the first two ways. I can generate the feelings directly from the pictures. And that's what we call synesthesia. It's a visual kinesthetic synesthesia. Or I run a movie, talk to myself, and then generate the feelings from the inner dialogue. That's another way of doing it. Okay. Here's the third way. I don't need to run pictures at all. I just talk to myself about what I think may happen or what I think other people might think or what I think other people might do. But I run it with internal dialogue and generate unpleasant feelings from the inner dialogue. That's another way to do it. And they all work to create unpleasant feelings. Now, not useful thing to do, but that's what happens. We all do this type of stuff from time to time, right? So, that inner dialogue, can you pop yourself back into this state? I'd like you to become very aware of that inner talk, that inner conversation. And I'd like you to be aware of the qualities of the voice. So how fast that inner dialogue, the tempo, how fast it is, the tonality, the rhythm, the intonation, which is a combination of rhythm and tone. Just for the class example of intonation, here's an Australian example. I went with my friend Kylie and we went down to the beach and it was a really nice day. And then we went for a swim. The voice was going up at the end of every sentence. That's just a pattern you might hear an Australian beach sometime. Or, I was with my friend and we decided to go to the beach and it was a really nice day. So the voice was going down at the end of every sentence. So people, that the pattern in terms of the rhythm and the tonality, intonation. So in a dialogue, when we talk to ourselves, it's going to have a certain volume, how loud, it's going to have a certain speed, it's going to have certain tonal qualities and rhythms and intonation. So I like just to be very aware of the quality of the voice. You don't need to tell me about it, just as long as you're aware of it. That's the important thing. Okay, next question about the voice. Where is that voice located spatially? So when you talk to yourself that way, where do you hear that from a spatial point of view? A particular place in your head, behind your eyes, is it in your throat, it's on the outside, is it in the front, is it behind, is it to one side? It could be,
I think usually it doesn't have like a sound to it. It's more like train of thoughts.
yeah. So, but it is in but it's the train of thought was language, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so to have it is either going to be auditory, so if you can hear, though it could be very, very quiet or almost silent, but it's there, or words you see. Do you see it by any chance?
No.
No. Okay. So isn't that interesting? So the fact it's like a train of thought is language, but you can't hear it.
It
Um,
doesn't always have like a voice attached to it.
no, but yeah, it doesn't sound like your voice out loud right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but the quality is different. Okay, is it? But you're aware of the words. That's the important thing. The train of
Yeah.
thought. I'd like you to test something for me. Try something out. It may or may not work, but let's find out. Can you take those words and project them so you see them in the written form in front of you? You could have them on a screen if you want to. So you take those train of thoughts and it goes from a conversational, dialogue form to a visual form where you see it before you on a screen. Can you do that?
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like it immediately dissolved it.
it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It just like dissolved all those thoughts.
Yeah. So that would be a specific process for you. That's for you. That's designed around the structure of how you have been occasionally um, um, generating an anxiousness about social situations where thinking about what people might think about you. Just stick it out, visualize it as words on a screen, and that will work for you.
And when I was doing that, automatically words were like apart from each other.
Sorry,
They were
I missed
all the
half the last sentence. Could you repeat that, please?
as I was doing that, the words they
Yeah.
were far apart from each other.
Yeah,
Very far apart, not like all together in like a nice sentence, but like all far apart.
that's even better. That's even better.
Yeah.
And note what's happened to your state.
That did change my state.
Yeah. So this is the type of drill for you. Now, you do this, it's like exercising for the future. You exercise because of what you're going to get later, which is greater muscle definition, more muscle, you know, improved ratio of muscle to fat composition, blah, 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 all the good stuff. Um, um, you rehearse this exercise, this piece. So you might do it daily. You probably don't have to do it for a week or 10 days max. You do it daily, and what you do is you find an example. You want to use a different example each time. An example where you were thinking about how other people might think about you. Different example each day. Put yourself in. The moment you get the state, the moment you feel the anxious state, take the inner dialogue, project that out there as see the words before you, and make sure you're going to do this naturally. Have a nice bit of space between the words, just like what you did, and that will dissolve the state. And just do one example a day for a week to 10 days. And what you're doing, you're building up the circuitry in your brain so that If you're caught by surprise and you suddenly feel that way, bang, your unconscious will automatically run the new process, state change. And that will work like a charm, by the way. So thank you very much. That was really interesting for me, because I haven't worked with that before with somebody, and that's something I've been wanting to work with. So that is just fabulous, and I'm so pleased for you. And by the way, you understand this is your discovery. You did this. You worked this out for yourself, right?
This was very interesting. Yeah.
Suggested ways of going about doing it, but you did the work, and that's what makes the difference.
Boom! You made it here! Good on you. Make sure you click the subscribe button below and check out the playlist at the end. If you'd like to come along to our Sunday sessions where we host a live, free Q&A for our students and members, you're welcome. I'll see you there.